first thing we're going to do is we're going to stamp the animals in StazOn. And as the name implies, StazOn stays on. So if you get it onto your acrylic blocks, it's there for good. So be very careful when you're using your acrylic blocks. So we're going to pull this off. I keep my little plastic cover on there because it helps keep it moist. Of course you can. It is solvent based, so it does tend to evaporate fairly quickly if you leave it open. So don't leave it open for great periods of time, but you can re-ink it. Alright, I have gone ahead and already stamped these three, but I'm going to stamp now the elephant. Again, ink it up really good. Try to be careful not to get it on your acrylic block. And this is just on scrap paper, so it doesn't have to be lined up any particular way. And I'm going to cover that back up while that's soaking in. Now, one thing about acrylic stamps, they do tend to have they stick a little bit to the paper. So when you pull it up, and it's even worse with the StazOn, so when you pull it up, just kind of pull slowly, and there we have a nice crisp image. The StazOn will stay on the acrylic and it will stain it, but again, once again, it doesn't affect the quality of the stamping image. So I'm going to take that back and put it back on to the acetate. I've already cleaned and used this, and so you just lay it back on and you're good to store. And imagine being able to store 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stamps in that kind of space. So a lot more space saving than wood block stamps. Okay, and more environmentally friendly with that as well. Now what we're going to do is we are going to color these animals. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is what I do, and like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't profess to be a watercolor expert, but this is what I do with my watercolors. Is I use watercolor pencils. The ones I'm going to be using here are Faber-Castell art grade pencils. Close to My Heart does sell watercolor pencils, and I just haven't purchased any yet, but I do have these. And all I do is I take watercolor paper. This here is watercolor paper that you can buy at the craft store. And I just color. And one thing I learned the hard way is as you're pulling colors out, go ahead and do several shades, because then, you know, this may seem dark enough till you use the blender pen and it doesn't seem dark enough, so you may want to use something considerably darker than you thought you would want to use. But when you do that, label the color. So on this pencil, for example, it has a number, and so that's what I use. But the Close to My Heart, you may just need to put the name of the color down. The Close to My Heart doesn't have as many as the set that I have with the Faber-Castell, so it may not be that big of an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that, and then I have a blender pen that you can see has been loved on, and because that will also fade out, get stained, but it doesn't affect the quality. And then what I want to do is I can just pick up color, and as you can see what's happening there, and I'm picking up color, and then I can lay the color down on the paper, and that's what we're going to do. So with these, I end up coloring, of course, the lion in shades of browns, shades of gray for the elephant, some grays for the hippopotamus, but I also use some blues to give it a little bit more of a blue-gray look, and then of course the monkey in several browns. And so I'm going to do that, and we're going to speed it up so I don't bore you too much. Okay, so here you would come back in. Now, as I'm doing this, you can see that I put my initial color here and then just kept going, because as I go, the color wears off and becomes lighter and lighter. Okay, so we're not adding color all the way down the ears. We want the ears darkest at the top. If I want it darker, I can go in and just keep adding, because as I add color over the color, it gets darker and darker gradually. It's better to start off light And then if you need to add more, you can always add more, but it's tough if you add too much to go back the other direction. Alright, we're going to keep going here. And I keep it dark around the edges, or darker, and then I fade out. And imagine wherever you want to highlight. Highlighting, you just don't want to add color. Kind of let the cardstock be the highlight. So wherever I add the least color is my natural highlight, instead of saying adding white or something like that and trying to give it that natural highlight. So imagine where if the sun was hitting on the elephant, where would you want that light to be? Would it be coming from this direction? So maybe this side of him is lighter, and back here on the other side of his head is going to be darker because his trunk is shading. So we're going to keep this darker here, and then just kind of fade out as we move towards his feet. Now I'm not going to color his toes because I'm going to use white pen to do that. Maybe his ear is shading his body a little bit. Okay, now the one thing you have to keep in mind is this is not watercolor paper. I'm just using the Colonial White. So if you work it too much, you'll actually start to tear up the paper. The paper will get wet and it'll start to tear up. So you have to be careful if you're not using watercolor paper not to overwork it, because you'll end up tearing up the paper. Of course, the watercolor paper is much more forgiving for working it. If you see that it's starting to tear up a little bit, leave it alone and come back to it after it's dried. Don't keep working it. Alright, so there we have our elephant. Now, obviously what makes it cute is the pink. So I have two shades of pink I was using here, one that's a little lighter. They may not look very different, but I just pick up some pink. I kind of tap off to make sure it's not too strong, and I'm going to pick up in his ears and give him some pink shading in his ears. I think I will come back and add just a light shade of gray and kind of come up from the bottom of his ears. And there you have the elephant. I'm going to go ahead and color the rest of these. Now the next step is to cut them out.